Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings and thank you so much for joining us today, right here on Herbally Yours, on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And today, I thought I would bring you the latest research on a topic that is just all over the place. I'm not sure if you have heard of it or not, but it's called the microbiome. And I have been studying the microbiome for many years because in my book, Arthritis, I write a lot about inflammation, obviously, because that's what causes arthritis. And it turns out that inflammation is directly linked to the health of your microbiome. Now, we're talking about something today called MAC, M-A-C. Oh, you mean macaroni and cheese? Well, actually, that's one of the worst foods for your microbiome because it causes the growth of the kind of microbiome that initiates inflammation. So we're not talking about MAC, macaroni and cheese. We're talking about MAC, the Microbiota Accessible Carbohydrates. Wow, a whole new term and perhaps a new thought form for some of you. But all of it relates to health and wellness. So I thought I'd bring you this new research, the really cutting-edge research. One of the things is I have been doing natural medicine for so long that I guess I started in 1964. It's over 50 years now, amazingly enough. And I can see how, following these precepts has played out over time, both for my clients, my family, myself, versus people who just, kind of went a different route and where we come up to feeling well, especially in where I'm at now, which is the golden years. And it's really been my favorite time of life, believe it or not. So one thing is back then, I had to actually go to the library, and as a matter of fact, Nassau Community College, right here, our alma mater for Herbally Yours, is one of the places I used to go once a week. I also was allowed in post. I worked out with these local colleges because I grew up I went to Syosset High School, so I was local. I worked out with them to be allowed to go into the medical libraries, even though I wasn't a student yet. I was too young. I was a kid. My dad used to drive me there. Could you imagine that as a hobby? So that I could research the medical literature because that's one of the things I have always loved to do, so that I would understand the latest research about health and wellness. And nowadays, you can do that just like I now do that every single day right from my computer. So there's various sites that I research and that I just go on their mailing list and they send me stuff whenever new things come in. A really excellent one is called Gut Microbiota for Health. That is an excellent research-focused blog that's also consumer-friendly in terms of being able to read it very easily. And they have food for gut health, all the research about it, and all the news articles on it. It's just an amazing phenomenon. I used to take one full day, like every week, usually on the weekend, when I could get into those medical libraries to do my research. And then I used to take the journals themselves to, it used to be called the Xerox machine, for those of you who are old and remember, and make physical copies of them. And then when I was writing my books, I had to have the papers on the floor and read the articles and then physically type out the whole name of the journal. Could you imagine that? Next to now, I just go online, grab the reference, click, and put it in my research so I can show where I got this concept from. It's just an amazing time that we're in now. And that has actually moved research ahead much more quickly. So we're going to talk about MAC. Macaroni and cheese. Nope. The Microbiota Accessible Carbohydrates. What could that possibly mean? Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of popular dietary trends, and are they truly beneficial for gut health? First, I would like to say that your microbiota, which all of you have, all of us have it, and it is becoming, a buzzword in many areas of research today. What it means is the group of microorganisms that live in your gastrointestinal tract. By the way, there's microorganisms everywhere. In fact, you are a walking condominium association for millions of microbes. And whether you think that's a creepy thought or not, that's okay. It doesn't matter, but it's the truth. And many of them are tremendously beneficial. For instance, how your body makes vitamins is that the microbiota that is in your gut takes the food molecules that you put in there and then uses that to create B vitamins. So they are totally intimate with every single aspect of health. In fact, one thing that I know many of my clients are surprised to find out is that their microbiota also communicates by sending out chemical messengers to their brain. So if you have one kind of microbe in your gut, it sends certain messages to your brain, which may initiate something like depression and bad mood. And if you have another kind of microorganism in your gut, it sends out a chemical messenger, which communicates to receptor sites in your brain that initiate feelings of peace and happiness. Do you believe that? It is so intimate to who you are. And one of the things we know is that you can control who moves in to your condo association. You really can. So if you just are eating a whole lot of junky food, you are inviting in a different variety of microbiomes than if you're eating a wide variety of foods. And that's one of the things we're going to look at today. Because humans don't consume nutrients in isolation. If you focus on overall diet quality, it's a better way to take care of gut health. So we're going to look a little bit on how different dietary patterns affect your gut microbiota in terms of both, potential benefits and side effects. And the diet, your own diet, whatever you choose to pick up and put in your mouth, is the easiest and most effective way to keep your gut microbiome in good shape. And very often the first people who care about this or even look into it is people who have various kinds of gastrointestinal conditions like irritable bowel syndrome and Crohn's disease and other kinds of digestive difficulties. Like there's commercials on now, it goes dun 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 dun, and you're having a war with a mozzarella cheese stick or something, and then you take an antacid and then that quells the burn. Well, it does quell the burn, but it also interferes greatly with nutrient absorption and with the health of your microbiome. So just going ahead and eating those foods that initiate an inflammatory response and then taking an antacid to offset that is absolutely the wrong way to go, and also will lead, although you might get temporary relief, it leads to a disassociation and the development of an incorrect microbiome over time, which leads to inflammation, which leads to autoimmune disease, such as lupus, it leads to depression, it leads to diabetes, it leads to heart disease and cancer, it leads to every known disease known to man. The inflammatory response is huge. And if we get back behind the inflammatory response, it is regulated by many things, and one of them is the health of your microbiome. Isn't that amazing? So not all current food fad diets, however, improve the good bacteria in your gut. I notice as a health provider and discussing with clients what might be best for them, that if we look at traditional Chinese medicine, we always take into account the person themselves, not just everybody eats the same thing. For instance, a really good diet for almost everyone, and a really good place to start if you're interested in encouraging the best microbiome within your own body. And again, you decide by what you're eating, amazingly enough, is a mostly plant-based Mediterranean diet. That this talks about taking in more vegetable protein over animal protein. And also, it's been acknowledged as the best science-backed diet for boosting overall gut health. Why? Because that will ensure that you're getting a variety of plant-based food that include fiber. Fiber is very important, as well as specific vitamins, minerals, and a whole class of nutrients called polyphenols. And polyphenols cannot always be easily digested, but what happens is they become short-chain fatty acids. And the short-chain fatty acids help to support the growth of beneficial bacteria. And there are many species. Two that are best known are called lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. And when people go out and buy probiotics, spend a lot of money on buying probiotics, those are the two that you're often going to see on your label. So they're sometimes called acidophilus and bifidobacteria. Those are lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Okay, acidophilus is one of them. However, eating terribly and just popping those probiotics is not going to help as much as having a really excellent diet that increases the intake of MAC. Remember what that is? Not macaroni and cheese, but Microbiota Accessible Carbohydrates. So the typical Western diet, which is much higher in animal protein and very low in microbiota accessible carbohydrates, or MACs, has been linked to a drop in the number of healthy gut microbial genes. And that's considered a marker of an altered gut microbiota problem, and also compromises the gut barrier integrity. So gut barrier integrity has to do with a term called leaky gut syndrome. And if you go and ask your doctor, wow, I just read a whole list online of all these symptoms and I have all of them. Do I have leaky gut syndrome? Very often your physician will say, that's no such thing as leaky gut syndrome. I'm sorry to say they are incorrect, and I would love to discuss that with any physician you have who says that. However, this helps. Instead of saying leaky gut syndrome, you say you have compromised intestinal permeability. When you use that term, compromised intestinal permeability, what is permeable? Permeable are when things get through, right? Like a permeable membrane, that's when things get through. Well, guess what? Compromised intestinal permeability means exactly the same thing as leaky gut syndrome. So I'd like to remind you that you are listening to Herbally Yours right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. And we're so happy to be with you. We've been here many, many years. I think we started this show around 1990. And today, rather than having a guest, this is your host, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and we're talking about MAC, Microbiota Accessible Carbohydrates, and how if we increase our consumption of them, we then can move towards getting rid of things like leaky gut syndrome, which is called compromised intestinal permeability. And we also know how we do that. So very often when people are having digestive difficulties, they will move to some of the trendy and very extreme diets. And actually, those have consequences as well. They're very unbalanced, and extreme diets can also affect the amount of microbiota accessible carbohydrates that you take in. This is the case, as we said, with a Western diet, which is high in animal protein and fat, and that's linked to a drop in those healthy microbiome, but also a high intake of protein, which can increase fermentation in the large intestine and impact the gut. So that would be something like, let's say, the keto diet. That might provide cause for concern because it's a high-fat diet that restricts carbohydrate intake, and this would be called like a carb-free diet. It sounds really good because it definitely is an excellent diet for quick weight loss, and I even say, people may want to try that because once that kicks in and you feel like you're losing some weight efficiently, you can add back in healthy carbs. But the keto diet has been associated with gut-related side effects such as abdominal pain, and it also poses a challenge in terms of obtaining all the nutrients that you need, in particular fiber and B vitamins, because it has a negative effect on microbial diversity and therefore a reduction in the level of beneficial bacteria. So beyond affecting just your gut, the elimination of certain foods and nutrients can also affect the proper functioning of your immune system and lead to overall poor metabolic health. And, the connection between the brain and the gut is really just so fascinating to me, and I do lecture about it all over the country and the world. Used to be actually flying there and giving these lectures in Europe and all over the country, but now we're doing it almost all by Zoom, another amazing phenomena. But nonetheless, looking at how mood and brain health, which people don't always think about being related to their digestion, but science is showing that it is totally true that it does. For instance, there's such great research coming out. Here's one from a major medical journal called Gut, and it's specifically 2020, so it's a brand new article, and it's called The Mediterranean Diet, Gut Microbiota and Health, and it tells you all the research about how we have figured out about this gut-brain connection. In other words, the gut microbiota at the intersection of diet and human health. Well, if we look at another diet you might have heard of, which is called the low FODMAP diet. That's a complicated diet. We've actually done a radio show on that. If you do search low FODMAP on our archives, or if you go ahead and email me at naturalnurse.com, I'll send you a link all about the low FODMAP diet. In desperation, a lot of people try that if they've been having gastrointestinal problems, but it does have a lot of drawbacks. You've probably heard of the gluten-free diet and also lactose-free diets. You've probably heard of those, and very often people will choose those in terms of how to deal with digestive issues, such as those associated with irritable bowel syndrome. However, extreme dietary choices are not necessarily a good fit for everyone. For example, it's not always a good idea to completely rule out lactose. Lactose is milk sugar, and although those people who are clearly sensitive to milk, they may feel better when they cut lactose out of their diet. It's a good thing to try. But lactose can be very supportive as a prebiotic for different kinds of healthy microorganisms. I'll tell you some of the other prebiotics. What prebiotics are healthy food for the right kind of gut bacteria. And there are some very specific foods that these gut bacteria like. I'll tell you this: sugar, high sugar, highly processed foods, think Twinkies or, all kinds of sugary cakes and things like that. That specifically influences the gut microbiota towards unhealthy, inflammatory kinds of microorganisms. Well, something like Jerusalem artichoke, you can find that in your grocery store. They're called sunchokes. They're really crunchy and delicious. They're actually from a particular flower, which is called the Jerusalem artichoke. It's a beautiful flower. I have them growing. It's a sunflower that flowers in the fall, and it's the roots that are edible, so you can even grow your own, but you can also buy them in the grocery store. They're called sunchokes, and they taste quite delicious, kind of like a water chestnut. It's very bland. You can put them in soup and stews and steam them. They're just kind of mildly crunchy, no real strong flavor. Well, they are excellent food as a prebiotic. That means the thing that these positive microorganisms like to eat. And then when they grow, it actually causes all kinds of digestive problems to go away. So there are also exclusion diets. Like, for instance, you might use only whole grains and vegetables and fruits and fermented dairy products, which include carbohydrates that nourish your gut microbiota. So even when you're really reducing one specific kind of food, it might really be better to do that for a short period of time, like we talked about the keto diet, doing it for a short period of time, and then going back and including a wider variety. That's a really good thing to do. So a well-balanced diet tailored to the individual's needs and situation is the best option, both for people who feel well in general and people who have gastrointestinal conditions. So the Mediterranean diet is highly regarded as a healthy, gut-balanced diet. And then when we go to popular exclusion diets, such as gluten-free, when it's very, very strict, and low FODMAP, which I'm not going to describe today because it's complicated, but it's fairly popular. We actually had an author of a book called Low FODMAP Diet on our show right here on Herbally Yours, and I can send you the link to that. Also, a lactose-free diet, which means milk-free. Some people are sensitive to dairy and do need to reduce its use, and others don't. But when we have these really strict exclusionary diets, it can leave the gut microbiota without its fuel of choice in the long term. So completely eliminating these food groups might not be the best choice. And you may want to speak with a dietitian. Another thing that I definitely discuss with all the people I talk to is to have a specific test done. It's called an IgG, food allergy profile. Now, very often if you go to your regular allergist, you will get something called an IgE profile. In an IgE profile, we can find foods you're allergic to, but these are often the foods that when you eat them, they have an immediate response. And many people already know what those foods are going to be. Like, for instance, they eat shrimp or fish, and their lip blows up every time. Or they eat a certain food and their vision gets blurry, every time. And they link it to that food, so they know about that sensitivity. But an IgG is something that will kick in as a response to a food you've eaten that you're sensitive to 3 days later. So you're not always able to catch it. And a very common one would be wheat and dairy. So you won't ever catch it because every day you're having wheat and dairy, and every day you're in a bad mood. Every day you have stomach grumbly. Every day you have going to the bathroom problems. And if those are ongoing, you never, without an IgG test, will link it to the fact that you ate this particular food, which then imbalances your microbiota and you don't know it, and then you have all these symptoms that you wish would go away, and then you take a pharmaceutical drug and that helps to cover the symptoms, usually temporarily, but ongoing over time they have adverse effects which are sometimes much worse than the initial problem that you had. So it is a good idea to investigate how you could move towards a well-balanced diet tailored to your individual needs and supporting your MAC, your MAC, your macaroni and cheese, your Microbiota Accessible Carbohydrates. Those are the things that the microbiome eat. So if you want to bring into your body really good, healthy microbiota, then you want to have in your diet those foods that supports the growth of a healthy microbiome. And this is going to help so many aspects of health and wellness, not only digestive difficulties, but things like weight loss, brain fog, skin irritation and rashes. All of these things are directly linked to what you're eating. And most people have something that's different so that they may need a very specific thing. One thing to check is have a little index card. And I have clients walk around with index cards all day and markers. And every time you eat something, just put the color of that thing on your index card and thinking about creating a rainbow. So have you eaten that day red cabbage, zucchini, broccoli, red peppers, radishes that are red, cucumbers that are green? Let's say basil would be a great thing. Avocados, all of these are very, very high in MAC, Microbiota Accessible Carbohydrates, that help regrow a healthy microbiome, invite the right microorganisms to live in your condo, which is your body, and that actually helps you feel better, look better, and think better, and have a happier mood and affect. All of those things are linked to the MAC. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today right here on Herbally Yours. And I want to remind you that Herbally Yours is produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. For any further information, please email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi, the Natural Nurse, and you can find me at naturalnurse.com. And I'd love to invite you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.